Hello fellow collectors, I hope you're all doing wonderfully well. Today I continue my series where I talk about the best films I watched in the preceding month. September was actually my busiest month for films so far this year, and I ended up watching 38 of them, so you can imagine the time I had sifting them down to just the 6 that I'll talk about here. But as I did watch so many, do be prepared for me to throw a good few honourable mentions at you near the end. But that's enough preamble, so let's get straight into it and talk about the best films I watched in September. The first one is by one of my favourite filmmakers, Louis Buñuel, and it's Death in the Garden. From 1956 and starring the wonderful Simone Signoret as a prostitute, Michel Piccoli as a priest, Charles Vanel as a diamond miner, and Georges Marchal as a bit of a rogue. These characters are thrown together into a melting pot of government repression, revolt, unrest, love and betrayal, all in a hot and humid Latin American village and surroundings. I'd describe it as part melodrama, part adventure story, with a sprinkling of political commentary, which of course it wouldn't be complete without, given that it's a Buñuel film. I had such a great time with this one. I thought it was superbly acted and shot, and there is fantastic chemistry between all of the actors, and it all feels very believable. There is tension, brutality, despair, hope and joy, all rolled up into an excellent 104 minutes. I was lucky enough to get the Eureka edition just before it went out of print, but if you can find it, I can highly recommend it, especially so if you're a fan of Buñuel's films. Next, and from 1963, is a Turkish film directed by Metin Erksan called Dry Summer. Starring, and forgive me for savaging the pronunciation of these names, Ulvi Dogan, Errol Tass, and Hulya Kosicit. This is part of Martin Scorsese's World Cinema Project, Volume 1, from my Masters of Cinema release of it, though Criterion do release them in the US. I think this is the first Turkish film I've ever seen, and I wasn't too sure what to expect going into it, but I was very pleasantly surprised because it was excellent. It's a dramatic tale of sibling rivalry, young love, secret desire and jealousy. The film weaves its narrative threads together wonderfully well, and things build up to a conclusion brimming with furious emotion where you'll find yourself on the edge of your seat with your fists clenched. I'm guessing that it's probably not still the same in Turkey today, but I also really enjoyed getting a sense of the culture which permeated throughout this film, from family dynamics to village politics, as well as the etiquette of love, all of which played their parts in contributing to the richness of the story here. A really great watch, and it's made me excited to check out the other 2 films in the World Cinema Project box set. Moving on, and we have one that you might not expect to see on my list, and I think it actually might be the first comedy that's made it onto my best films of the month list all year. But this one undoubtedly deserves its place here, and that's Napoleon Dynamite. Now this is a rewatch for me, but it had been quite a while, so I was delighted to find that it's just as funny as ever. From 2004 and starring John Hader, Efren Ramirez, John Grease, Aaron Rule and Tina Majorino. And how could I not mention Sandy Martin, aka Mac's mum from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. All directed by Jared Hess, who would then go on to direct Nacho Libre. The film is set in what I'm guessing is the 90s, with some heavy lingering 80s vibes. We follow the story of the titular Napoleon Dynamite, a high school kid who is weird, quirky, strange, lovable, and a dichotomy of confident and lacking in confidence all at the same time. I feel like describing this one would almost do it an injustice because it just needs to be experienced, so all I'll say is that this is strange, hilarious and wonderful. I think you'll know almost immediately whether the style of comedy is for you or not, but if it is for you, my goodness are you in for a treat. It's just been added to Netflix here in the UK, which is why I was able to rewatch it, because I don't actually think that we have a Blu-ray release of it in the UK at all, which is a real shame because it's one that I would love to have in my collection and I think certainly deserves a great release. But if you do have Netflix, you should definitely check this one out if you haven't already, and if you have, then it's definitely time for a rewatch because it absolutely holds up. Next up is a film from Indicator's Columbia Noir No. 1 box set, and it's Drive a Crooked Road. It is, of course, a film noir from 1954 and starring Mickey Rooney, Diane Foster, Kevin McCarthy, and directed by Richard Kind. At least I think that's how you say his last name. This one seems fairly unremarkable. It's a fairly straightforward story of a talented car mechanic come racing driver, getting embroiled with some shady characters through love and crime. It seems just more or less like a standard, albeit interesting, film noir, but it's one that's kept with me after I watched it. I think I've only ever seen Mickey Rooney in his cameo in The Simpsons and at Breakfast at Tiffany's, so I'm not really very familiar with him as an actor. I thought he was fantastic here though. His performance was so compelling and engaging, and I found myself utterly enthralled while watching it. Diane Foster was also absolutely excellent, and she really sold and conveyed some brutal emotional punches that sent this film into a 4 out of 5 for me. Probably my favourite out of the Columbia Noir No. 1 box set. I can highly recommend this one if you've got it and you've yet to watch it. There's something I can't quite put my finger on in this film that's made it linger in my thoughts long after seeing it, and that's the sort of thing that doesn't happen all that often, but it's certainly something that makes me want to revisit a film time and time again. Then we've got something that is a bit of a cult classic, but it was my first time seeing it, and that's Clerks from 1994. Written and directed by Kevin Smith and starring Jeff Anderson and Brian O'Halloran, as well as a host of others that come and go throughout its runtime. I've no idea why, but I've never really been at all interested in anything Kevin Smith has done. However, Clerks is on my poster of 100 cult classics to watch, and so I finally decided to give it a go, and as it turns out, I loved it, and I thought it was brilliant. I'm a huge fan of this particular style of film and filmmaking, very dialogue heavy where there's not an enormous amount of plot, where it almost feels like you're right in the film with them just hanging out as well. It reminded me of some ways of films like Friday with Ice Cube or Coffee and Cigarettes by Jim Jarmusch. It's a snapshot of what can happen in your early 20s, where you had dreams but now you feel maybe a bit aimless, or perhaps powerless to fulfill them, despite them almost certainly being within your power to work towards. That period between school and career where you can kind of meander about for a few years after university. Despite its facade and apparent pseudo-intellectualism, I do think there is actually plenty of depth here as well. Overall, just a really enjoyable watch, and though as I understand it number 2 and the recently released number 3 are not as good, I do think I might give them a go. And then last on my list, but most certainly not least, is Ingmar Bergman's Wild Strawberries. From 1957 and starring Victor Sjöström, B.B. Anderson and Ingrid Thurlin. How can I even describe this one? Well, I'd say it's a film about journeys. It includes a literal road trip journey, as well as a journey through memory. Our protagonist here is Dr. Isaac Borg, who needs to travel from Lund to Stockholm in order to accept an award. He's accompanied by his daughter-in-law, and they meet others along the way. Interspersed throughout is Dr. Borg's memories of his childhood and his life, each set off by a particular chance event or meeting. It's almost like a near-death experience, where he seems to be living in these long moments that have endured in his mind despite the years. Did he make the right choices, or did he have the power to change choices that were made for him? Did he act in the way he should have? He travels through his many years and sees himself and parts of his life reflected in those around him. Overall, this one was a wonderful experience. I know at some points sombre or bittersweet, it was very thought-provoking and thoroughly engaging, certainly worthy of its status amongst Bergman's filmography in my opinion. And then lastly we're onto the Honourable Mentions. The first up is Bob Le Flambeur, a fantastic gambling and heist film. Then Léon Morin, Priest, another film by Melville with plenty of thought-provoking content. Then The Proposition, which was just as brutal as I had been led to believe. Punishment Park, another very thought-provoking one. Bull, purely because of Neil Maskell and his performance, which elevated the entire content of the film. He was fantastic. And then lastly, Casino Royale, which I ummed and ahed about including in the full list above, but I'm sure nearly everyone has seen it at this point. But still, it was a fantastic rewatch for me and easily worthy of being included at least in my honourable mentions. And that's a lot. That was my September in film. I hope yours was also an excellent one, and I hope your October has been going brilliantly as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.